So as we start, welcoming people from YouTube who are now joining this particular series, and I will also start the webinar in a few seconds. But for the YouTube folks, welcome everybody. And it's such an honor to host Naina today. So Naina is quite an icon. I think almost everyone has heard about her, both from the younger generation, people from industry, people in the government. So Naina is extremely well known. And she's done so many things in life which have made all of us very proud of who she is and her achievements. And so it's a privilege to host you, Naina, today.
Thank you, Anil. I've known you over the years, and I've always known you as one of the best folks in HR and leadership. And it's just good to connect with you.
Thanks a lot. And we are now also welcoming people from those who have registered in the webinar. And I often ask myself the question that where do these names come to me? Because this is not a systematic process of making a list and then saying I should reach out to this person. But when I begin to ask myself the question, who are the leaders whose stories would inspire many people and whose authentic conversations would touch many hearts, especially amongst the younger generation, then your name came up, and I was so happy when you said yes. So thank you, Naina, once again. Thank you very much.
One can hardly say no to you, Anil, but now you really put me on the mat in terms of living up to expectations.
No, thanks a lot. So Naina, let's start right from the beginning. Tell us about the early part of your life, your growing up years, your family, the other influences. So describe to us where it all began.
Anil, that does go back a long way, but I think the most important influences were inevitably leadership roles I got thrust into and enjoyed. And that begins to start. And therefore, it's so important that we as teachers, as parents, instill this in our children in any way. It can be playing a game where you captain a team, and it can be playing football as a 6-year-old. It's being prefect in the class. It starts very early. And when you begin to enjoy that, and it always takes guidance. I know my father was a very big role model for me in my life. And we had a lot of conversations. And from when I was very little, in fact, I can remember these conversations. It was earlier reading Aesop's fables with him, where this wisdom coming through the years, the Panchatantras of India, was sort of instilled in me. And also for him to help me understand failure, for him to understand I was very competitive by nature, and it came from enjoying games. It came from enjoying being first in class. It came from being prefect, which was quite dangerous if you think about it. And he saw this very early, and was a very important guide for me to recognize how competition with oneself was the right thing, but competition vis-a-vis others was not. And so there were some amazing pearls of wisdom which came from him. And I was very fortunate that he was in the corporate world. So some of those learnings, I think, also got instilled in me, which helped. My mother was deeply religious, very religious more than spiritual. And but through her, I began to understand a lot more about what being Hindu is about. And she would visit an ashram for a month or 2 months in the year. And I was growing up in this sort of very Marxist economic regime where all religion was for the masses. And I would scoff at her. And I remember very early, and I raise this because I feel we learn so much from what is around us. But it's so easy to scoff at it because we don't understand it. Because I didn't understand it. I was annoyed that my mother would leave us for a month or 2 in the year to disappear to this ashram. And it took my father to tell me that you have no right to be judgmental until you go and see for yourself. And if you come back and you tell me you still feel the same way, then I'm much more ready to accept it. So off I went with mother, hot, blazing heat of May into the lower foothills of the Himalayas. We had to cross 7 rivers to get there, and muttering that this was just such a waste of time. And I went for what was 2 weeks and stayed a month. And it was an eye-opener. I mean, I won't even start to tell you in what ways. But for me, that itself was the learning. That just because I was educated and had learned something and believed in what was the issue of the day, which was, religion was for the masses, did not give me the right to understand everything. So it was these multiple influences. Our home was very cosmopolitan. We had people coming in from all over the world. So I think that helped me understand a lot of what helped me in my career later, because I largely worked with global organizations. Music in the home, both Western and Indian classical music, and my love of that, deep love of nature. So I think these home influences, school influences, I was in a convent, Loreto convent, in boarding school in Simla, so strong Christian influences. All of this makes one into this amalgam that emerges ultimately.
So, and how young were you when you began to pay attention to what your heart was telling you as to what you want to do in your life? When did that first appear? How young were you at that when that appeared?
I think quite early. I was pretty clear that I wanted to do something. And I think because my father was in the financial business and he was CEO of an insurance company, I visited him in the office. I enjoyed the stature that he had around him and what he enjoyed. I loved sitting in his swivel chair. I think I must have been 6 or 7 years old with that big desk, probably more fascinated by the pencils and uh, pens and all the stationery around than anything else at the time. So I think those influences start very early. And I often wonder why we as parents can't take our children into our workplaces more, because it was an influence. And I think uh, it seemed to have been sort of a natural course that just, emerged. So I would say by the time I was doing an economics degree at Lady Shri Ram College, I was already set on a course of, well, I think I want to enter the financial services sector in the corporate world. So, I would think the influence started early. The recognition of it probably came later.
Tell us about some of the most critical choices you made early in your life, a choice to pursue one path and not to do something else that you could have done.
Uh, I I think the one I fought for was to go off for my MBA at Harvard Business School, because there were a lot of questions around my leaving the country. And I left, at the age of 22, 23, which I did make me the youngest in my Harvard Business School class. But in my parents' eyes, it was still a little early. And the US was very far away. Those days, which was way back in 1980, you didn't even get the direct flight, right? And flying was very expensive. It was all very far away. It was pretty clear when I went for 2 years, I wasn't going to come back at all in between, unlike kids these days who seem to fly back at least 2 or 3 times a year. So it was all, I think, rather alien to my world, at least certainly to my parents. And it wasn't helped by the fact that the social structures around all were like, hey, where do you think you're sending her? She should be getting married now, all this nonsense. So there was social pressure, I think, and my mother felt it maybe more than my father in terms of this whole decision to go. And I'm often sort of congratulated for being the first Indian woman to go to Harvard Business School, but it is really such a sad social comment. And we didn't go because we couldn't withstand these pressures back home, which did not see it as being befitting and right for women to go and educate themselves so far away. And I think that was, the more I had people around me, the elders sort of wanting to hold me back, the more stubborn and rigid I became in terms of saying, I'll go, come what may. And I think sometimes the naysayers really help, because the less they believe in you, the more you want to show them that you can do it.
Yes, this is something so true, that what you're talking about, that sometimes unwittingly somebody says you cannot do it. And then you say, what is this all about? So you get provoked to that. And sometimes you thank those people, as you said, for
Absolutely, yeah.
So then the fact that you want to try for the best, because Harvard has always been one of those institutions that people dream about, and some people don't even apply saying, I don't know whether I'll make it. But in your case, I thought it was very clear to you, I want to go for some of the best institutions, and you had the self-confidence that I will apply. Where did that come from?
Well, I might tell you, I was given a precondition by my father that if I didn't get into the best, I wasn't going. So it was told to me quite like, and I could see the sense in that. So I picked what were, 3 colleges at the time and those days applying was a real headache. You had, I don't even want to start to tell you how difficult it is to fill up forms in a manual typewriter. But that's the way you had to do it, right? I did apply to Harvard, to Wharton, and Ann Arbor. That was my sort of backup. And it worked out really well that I had the option, and Harvard was an obvious choice. I didn't look at the West Coast because it was even further away. Yeah. So.
Very nice. Now, amongst all the things you have done after Harvard, describe to us a time when you were at your happiest best, something that you did that even now when you look back at what you did makes you smile, something special.
Well, if it's work, I think the fact that I was instrumental in bringing a 5-day week into HSBC, and I was CEO at the time of the bank. We had 5-day weeks elsewhere in the world, right? In India, we had a 6-day week as banks. And through a diversity initiative that I was driving, I had set up committees which were made up largely of middle management women. And each of those committees was headed by a guy, and my entire top team at the time were men, because I was parachuted into this job of CEO, and the entire team below me were guys. So I put each one of them to head these groups so that they could be sensitized as much to what the issues were, because our diversity ratios were really quite poor. And this is now way back in 2006. And the learning from these women, I mean, these guys used to come back and say, my God, we had no idea that these were the issues, that this is what was happening. And each of the committees had sort of given a mission to sort of solve for. And one of the big suggestions that came back with one of the groups was, well, why don't we have a 5-day week like most of industry has? Why do we as a bank? And it was actually such a simple question that I was like, well, why don't we? And, we can keep the branch open for 6 days, but we can do a roster amongst ourselves. So let's see how we can work out a system by which we work 5 days. And I had head office saying, hey, this, if it's going to cost this much more, and HR was working saying it's going to put our costs up 10%. So we tacked on an extra sort of half hour to each day for everyone and I pretty much got the whole bank saying, look, guys, this is a 6-month experiment. If this doesn't work, we end up going back to 6 days, because we really had to fight to get this done. And the whole banking industry was having a good laugh at this experiment, saying, oh, look at this nonsense. They'll just go back to a 6-day week. But the whole organization was so committed to making this 5-day work that productivity actually went up. Suddenly, people were charged up to prove that the 5 days works. our costs came down because we didn't have to keep all the head offices open, electricity costs, running costs, etc. We just said, hey, anybody who wants to come. It turned out there were a few people who did want to escape home on Saturday. They wanted to meet their boyfriends in the afternoon or girlfriends in the afternoon. So we did keep the office open, but it was skeletal presence. And I believe that this work, it was initially, it caused me a lot of anxiety because I stuck my neck out. But I think it really did, it was very fulfilling. So it started as a diversity initiative, but the whole organization benefited from it. And indeed, we did as a bank. And lo and behold, it took some banks a couple of years to figure out this was here to stay. I had RBI asking me, what was I trying to do? I said, well, it doesn't affect you because we are open 6 days to the customer. It's just that we have people coming in for 5 days. So this whole explanation, but the banking industry, as you well know now, has moved to what is a 5-day week. So it gives me a real joy that I had a team around me that could make this work so effectively that it became the norm.
So how was this whole process? You talked about diversity and inclusion, and there's a lot of research to show that actually this helps in greater innovation. It helps in higher amount of even productivity and quality. And of course, gender is one part of diversity. There are other aspects. So tell us more about your perspective. And I know that you have done a lot of work in this area. So can you talk us through some more of the things that you did?
Anil, at the end of the day, it's as simple as respect every human being for who they are, right? And every person has something to contribute. I was pretty clear from the beginning because I'd seen it that there was no point having a bunch of yes men around me or clones of a type. The diversity I genuinely believe this, and of course, research shows that this is the case now, that the more diversity, and I mean different disciplines, color, caste, creed, however you want to define it, that you have around the table, as long as everybody understands a common goal, that thinking is important. And people that can challenge you, people that will stand up to you. I may still reserve the right to make that decision, but I want to hear. And I think to assemble those people and groups around one is what is important. I think I have always believed that I do not have every skill set there is. I do not. And I need a team around me who fills in all those gaps that I have in myself. And that in itself means that there will be someone who is digital and tech, or someone who understands marketing and branding, and brings those skills in a way that we can all work together. So having that right team, collaboration, and diversity of viewpoint is so critical at the table. So if this drives the thinking, then you begin to look for talent that fills those gaps. So I'm really happy to say that by the time I had done my stint as CEO of the bank and moved on to be chairman at HSBC, we had a team where we had 4 of my direct reports were women, and they didn't come in because they were women. They came because they brought skill sets. We did also look for skill sets amongst and the women, and a couple were external hires, a couple were from within the organization, and we had a very noisy committee, which is what I wanted. Yeah, as long as we weren't having fisticuffs in each.
What a nice way to say that. So, you have to be very secure as a leader to encourage dialogue of this kind around you so that you bring out the best in people. So thank you for bringing that out, Naina. Tell me, in your long career, you would have had to learn many new dimensions all the time. There is a question of not just the cross-cultural skills, which you were fortunate when you went to Boston, you started getting that exposure, but also embracing technology, preparing for the service excellence and other experiences and so many other things. And also in your own capacity as a citizen of this country and contributing to community causes and things like that. So what was your own effort to keep on learning yourself? What was your formula you used to keep on inventing yourself for what was lying in the future for you?
I don't think it's conscious, Anil, but I think I've always been a sucker for learning and curiosity. Uh, and it comes in different ways. I mean, I get as excited by the heritage of India or music as I would about sanitation and environment, which I work in now, as indeed I did about management and banking. So one sort of picks up these influences in many ways. My interest in water and sanitation came while I was working at the bank, because the bank became very engaged globally on climate change. I was part of the global team, albeit based in India. And because the whole climate change piece had a lot of elements of water, which for India was so critical, I actually was part of the team that changed the messaging of climate change within the banks. $100 million program, £100 million program that the bank had to be on water, because climate change was, to my mind, just too broad. Water was far more operational and appealing to CEOs like myself based on the ground. And that journey of learning, which the bank provided me, and I was able to go to global forums on the subject and learn from everything the bank had, brought me into an area to do with water and sanitation, which in at least the 10 years out of the 13 I spent at HSBC, I became more and more deeply engaged in. Now, it wasn't a journey which I knew was going to happen. It got thrown my way. I got interested. It was a huge opportunity. And while I had my full-time work to do in everything else, this was part of the exposure which I was able to take with me. Uh, Along the way, I learned about financial inclusion. Microfinance in India was very big. So I picked up these threads, in that case, took the bank into supporting microfinance, not just as CSR, but we actually began to lend to microfinance institutions. And this got the attention globally for the bank. And the bank began to do more of it in other markets that were similar. So, you look for things that strike you as being good and true and necessary, maybe. Sometimes they work out for you at the workplace, sometimes they don't. But if you're interested in it, you can still continue the journey, as indeed I have in the case of water and sanitation. I think it just comes from having an open mind and learning from everything around you. I wasn't actively looking for it at the time. It fell my way. I enjoyed it. I picked it up and ran with it.
Very nice. Now, all of us, they say that sometimes some of the learning comes out of great amount of pain or difficulties or some completely unpredictable challenges that life brings to us. So what are some of those things that have happened in your life which have been, you can describe them as difficult moments, challenges, low points, but out of which you grew as a person? Would you like to describe some of those?
Anil, there's so many along the way that, there's personal tragedy. I lost my father when I was quite young. I mean, all of 30, and he was such a big influence in my life. So that becomes a pain point. You learn to rely on inner resolve. You learn to be glad that you still have another parent, that you have family, that you have a fabulous husband, that you have a young kid. So you find your sort of support systems as you go along. So personal tragedy, I think health. I went through a period where I really wasn't very well, but struggling to keep up with work and all of that. So that becomes a case of, there's an inner resolve. And I was almost like, am I getting a message here from God, that, hey, slow down. Should I be thinking more, spending more time reading and working differently? So you begin to reflect. And I think each of these pain points has been important because it changes the way we engage with the world, the way we engage with ourselves. And each of these is lessons to go forward with. But none of this becomes possible unless you don't have an inner strength or bases which you know help you, the things that help you de-stress. So in my case, it's family, it's nature. I love the wildlife. I love, I used to love trekking. I find I can do it less and less as actively as I did. But the fact that I know music, the things that make me happy or make me at least be able to cope with those negative times. I'm a born optimist. So all of this becomes a learning and turning point rather than a depression and falling away point. Yeah. But I think being able to learn from failure, being able to pick oneself up and run is just so important. And time again, I have seen colleagues fall and be so depressed that it, to me, just doesn't make sense. Why would you let yourself go like that? And whether triggered by a home event or a work event, and unfortunately, sometimes both can happen together because your stars just foretell it that way. But you have to be able to come out of it because whatever it is must end and will end.
Very nice. Naina, this current crisis, we have lost so many near and dear ones. Just a few weeks back, one of our closest friends from the Aisha group, Ravi Sikka, who was heading our taxation and finance function, unfortunately, we lost him all of a sudden because of COVID. And like that, there are so many near and dear ones that we have lost to this very unpredictable disease. And also, this COVID has completely changed the rules of the game in many ways. So, what are you discovering and learning out of this crisis, and what is being revealed to you as how we need to cope with this? And what's your message to all the young people on this platform? And so, what is the wisdom you are sourcing, and what would you like to share with them?
So, Anil, at two levels. I mean, one is, of course, as an individual. The other is as an organization, because of the boards I sit on and some of the advisory roles I have. I see the way organizations are having to change, and the two sort of get intertwined, right? So, at the organization level, and actually, we've had some reflection on this at the Harvard Business School sort of discussions that have been held there. The terms that are coming out of what does this new organization look like? What you need is resilience, agility, decentralized management, because what you want is, it pushes power to the edges. You need people to be able to take decisions closer to the ground, to be able to do the right thing for their employees. It's about collaboration, because it's a new normal. You don't know what is right. I mean, if the entire logistics system shuts down, as it did over lockdown, somebody sitting in every market in every state is having to decide what can move and how it can move, and how do you reopen a factory and how do you keep an office open, right? So the decision making entirely changed from what was very centralized to very decentralized, which means you need individuals who can rise to their challenge and enjoy the challenge. And of course, you have to give them the decision-making ability to do that. And of course, at the same time, you're looking at business continuity, you're looking at technology and digital and how that can drive growth, and of course, cash and liquidity. So at a corporate level, there's so many changes happening that nobody. I was witness to a discussion with Satya Nadella and others in the tech business were having, and they were all like, we don't know what this new normal is. Yeah. All we know is that it's going to be important to stay alive and to do it through resilience, through agility, through adaptation as we go along. So what does it bring for us at an individual level? I think, again, it points us as individuals into, can we pick up those opportunities it throws our way? Can we shine because we can suddenly be leaders in our own spaces? We can demonstrate that we can work with that empowerment which has come our way and take those decisions closer to the ground. And sometimes we'll go wrong. So the organization has to know that you may go wrong, but not kill you for it, but in fact, help you through those learnings. And hopefully you're right more often than you're wrong. I think I'm very struck by how empathetic organizations have had to become. You suddenly need to know how your employees are feeling mentally, and ability to cope while working from home has become important. And think about how often do we actually, in the old days, did we stop to ask our employees how they are, how are their families, and genuinely want to know that everyone's safe. Whereas every meeting today starts with how you been, is everyone okay? There's a degree of connecting, and that desire to know and have an empathy with the people we work with, the people we connect with, which it is a different world. I think the tragedy of how little people have in India, when we saw this huge migration back to the villages. I mean, it's heartrending. It's a stark reminder of how, even as growth lifts people out of poverty, how easily they can slip back. And what is it that we, as people, as individuals, need to do to help and put our little bit in to make sure? I think creativity and the way we organize capitalism going forward is going to require rethink. I've always been a firm believer, not just in CSR, but that the DNA of the organization should be one which is aligned with the communities it serves. And I think COVID makes us really think about that. It's beyond profit, beyond making money. How do we connect back with the communities around us in a way that works? Which social problem should the company take on? Which NGO to partner? I think all of this comes forward. And for someone like me who works in the sanitation space, to suddenly find health, hygiene, sanitation, all becoming quite central to the way we want to influence our surroundings is really, it's been a game changer.
Thank you. And I sit on the global board of Shizenken University in Japan, that is set up by the Harvard faculty, Dr. Noda and others, Nathan Noria's best friend. And along with Shizenken University in Japan and SOIL and the ISE Business School, which has campuses in Europe, and FGV in Brazil, we are offering a very innovative new course for all our students called The Future of Capitalism.
Oh, yeah. It's so important to think about it.
Yeah, so all the work of Rebecca Henderson, and
Yeah.
have an amazing book in that, the whole. I'm so glad that what you told us is something that we feel very much passionately about, and we are actually giving that kind of education to our students.
Yeah.
But now,
Anil, you were
yes.
always ahead of the times, but it's fabulous. Yeah.
No, thank you, Naina. Thank you. I now turn for Ayush to ask a question and start asking questions from the Q&A box to Naina. Go ahead, Ayush.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And, completely feel so fortunate to actually get this opportunity to ask ma'am a few questions here. So, ma'am, I think the first one from me would be that, we've all just heard that how your, childhood influenced you, your father's workplace, and then the schools that you went to or the workplaces that you went to. So that actually made you into the leader that you are today, right? But were there some things that you intentionally did to actually become the leader that you were, or maybe in your personal life, maybe in your professional life? What were some of the things that you actually worked upon to become the leader that you did?
I think always a desire to excel. And for me, it was important. It was important to do well, but to excel in a way that I was, I mentioned being competitive, but being competitive with myself rather than to have to pull down the person who was going to otherwise beat me at it was quite an important lesson. And hard work. I mean, I think there's just no shortcut to hard work. So that combination is critical, and I think there are two sort of value systems I've always held very close to my heart in every way. I think I learned very early also that integrity was very, very important. That at the end of the day, you don't get by lying or by finding shortcuts and cheating, right? So just having a value system which you fall back on and adhere to, the things, the guardrails which never change and are not going to change your life. So I'd add humility to this as well, in a way that for every successful person I met, and you begin to look at whether it's older people, people around you, what are the traits that you like in them and what are the traits you hate, and you learn from them what you want to be. And I think humility was one of those, because for people who are arrogant and full of themselves, it's very easy to like them, even if they are, big names. So one begins to learn from everyone one meets around one, what one wants to be. And that shapes who we are.
Wow, that's actually, so I think each thing that you said is so simple yet so profound. So thank you so much for that. Thank you. Maybe we'll move forward and take a few questions from the people that we have on the webinar. So the first question is that there's an interesting trend that a lot of CAs initially work as employees and then later on, become successful business owners. Do you feel there's a relation between the CA curricula and the business acumen?
This is from Ram Raju.
Yeah, I'd love to say yes, but I don't think so. I think if everyone has this sort of germ of wanting to maybe be an entrepreneur in today's environment, more so because there's so much success around one. Entrepreneurs that are succeeding, entrepreneurs that are making, they're becoming unicorns and billionaires. And I think it is wonderful to see how many people are jumping into the fray. And they aren't CAs, they aren't MBAs, they're often young engineers. They may not even be graduates. So I think this success as an entrepreneur is really the desire to be one, and belief in oneself that takes us that way. And, if you're a CA, you may lack for skills in marketing and engineering. If you're a marketing pro, you would lack the CA skills. So whatever you are, you're going to miss some things that you are not, and which is why you need a good team around you. And to be able to scale up, you would see that. I was quite struck by how many entrepreneurs actually end up being successful as they come in twos and threes when they set up a company. And I think some of it must be just having the sort of common desire to do something together. But there must be a degree of, each one filling the void that the other doesn't have.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much. So next question is from Arja ma'am. So Arja ma'am actually is the program chair for the HR course at SOIL. And I've been fortunate to be a student in her batch. So her, first of all, she mentions that she got the opportunity to meet you at a conference in Mumbai sometime back. And so the question is, what would your suggestion be for a gender-enabled workplace today, which can create well-being for all?
Yeah. Well, we've come a long way in that at least organizations are now trying to tick the box on being gender neutral. I remember that when I started work, you were lucky if you found the toilet on the same floor on which you worked. I would have to walk up 4 floors of stairs each time when I was sort of, mid-career in my job. Fortunately, these are not issues that we need to tackle all the time. But the fact is, having that right culture in the organization, I'm sad to say, is still not there. A culture which is enabling, which allows every woman to rise to her full potential, and if not to the top. And I think we have to give a lot more attention to this. I'm quite struck by the fact that this work from home, which I was a firm believer in terms of flexi hours and creating this environment while I was CEO at the bank. And we brought this in, by the way, as flexi hours. And I was really struck by 60% of the uptake was by men when we did this. Because men had issues too. They wanted to look after a parent at home, or they wanted to do a course or something. So flexi hours is important, And I think it applies to everyone in the organization. It certainly helps to women. But we are finding that through this COVID period, the work from home is actually proving quite a challenge for working women. And the chances are, and there's studies which are showing that she's putting in at least 3 hours more time than her husband or father in the family, because she's having to do the children being at home and being the home manager piece as well. So there has to be a little more sharing at the home front in terms of what a couple is contributing, because this load on the working woman is clearly causing a lot of stress. So working from home, flexi hours, all very well, but the home has to also change to enable the woman to function in a way that she might otherwise have done.
Right. Next question from Ramaraju Dasaratha is actually a very specific one. And the question is, did India's demonetization initiatives really help India? If so, what are some of the impacts, some of the measurable impacts of the same?
This is such a huge question. Yes, it did help India become more digital, right? It forced everyone into a system. And by everyone, I mean your Kirana merchant who was suddenly having to accept money online, right down to villages as well. It caused a lot of pain because digital is only possible if you have a very good internet, which we did not have at the time. But I think it forced the government and other providers to rise to the challenge and bring internet in. So the whole digital framework did improve. It began to slip back again once the effect of demon began to wane. But I think we did do a quantum jump as a country into that space. It was brought in to, I think, primarily tackle corruption and the cash economy therein. I think it helped there initially, but I'm sad to say that that change has not persisted. I see signs of the economy moving back to old ways. And I think GST has probably done more to help in the direction of ruling out corruption and the cash economy than demonetization ever did.
One question from the chat box, I'll pick up and prefix that. Beena Singh, who's my cousin, who was India's first mechanical engineer from IIT. And she was given golf lessons by your sister, Nonita.
Yes.
And so she says that, Nonita also, while giving golf lessons, often talked about your father. So he said he must be a very special person to that.
He was. And yes, you've had golf lessons from the best person ever. So yes, my father was, a very good golfer and a very good teacher. And I guess my sister took all the golfing genes, and I took his finance and insurance ones. So that was what he was, a golfer and an insurance CEO.
Yeah. Ayush, some more questions from the chat box as well. Yeah.
Sure, sir.
Rakesh Jinsi. Yeah.
Right. So we have a question from Rakesh, sir, and the question is, India has this unique situation of many ladies heading banks and financial institutions. What is your view as to how or why this happened?
I think it happened primarily because women that came into the workplace picked sort of the world of banking and finance because it was actually a safer environment than any. When I joined the workplace, and I was fairly clear I wanted to get into finance, but I also went through an analysis and a meeting with a few people to make sure I was making the right decision, where the guidance really was, well, you really don't have a choice because, companies like Hindustan Unilever and others used to very proudly state that they didn't hire women. They didn't hire MBAs and they didn't hire women. And why did they not? Because how can women go out into the towns and into the villages, and it's not safe, and without that experience of actually selling soap at the village level, how can you ever belong to a Hindustan Unilever, right? So the choices were very few. Whereas the world of finance banking was certainly wide open. It was urban, it was cities. You didn't have to, make your way through the marketplace and be out there. So I think many of us picked the world of banking and finance because the choices actually were pretty limited. For a mechanical engineer to be in a factory in the middle of nowhere would have been impossible in that environment. Whereas joining a bank and working in a nice environment in Bombay was not difficult. So I think we saw this, and the public sector banks also began to get, a bunch of people, and it took them, 25, 30 years to rise to the top. So we saw the first of the women CEOs in banking emerge because they came up through the system. It took far too long, but when there was a gap of almost 4 or 5 years from the time I was CEO to the time we began to see all these CEOs come through the system, because they were just coming through the system. I think I was lucky that I worked for multinational companies who were beginning to make changes elsewhere in the world, and they were much more aligned with creating an environment where there was reward for those who could deliver, and it didn't matter if you were a guy or a woman. So I think we saw this early entry, and then as the numbers grow, you get the advantage of being able to see a much bigger pool moving through. So the more that came through the system, the better the chances of women rising to the top. So early entry, and then larger and almost massing of numbers, which then enabled the rise to the top.
Thank you.
Khurshid Khurodi, a daughter of Naushad Khurodi, whom you probably know well.
Yes.
Yeah. Khurshid is asking. She also went to Harvard. So yeah, go ahead.
Right. So the question from her is, I play the piano, cello, and violin. The parallels between music, management, and leadership are astounding. And do you agree to that?
Oh, I mean, I agree completely. I played the piano too, but I can't say well enough. So probably more frustrated than enjoying the playing. But it taught me to enjoy music. I think, you played 3 instruments, which is pretty remarkable. I think you just learn how everything has to be in sync. And particularly if you're part of an orchestra, I mean, what better parallel is there than an orchestra and management and how you manage it? In fact, interestingly, when I was at business school, one of the cases we had in organizational behavior, which was one of my favorite really, because for half an hour we watched Zubin Mehta on the screen as the conductor. And I was so delighted it was Zubin Mehta in a global class with the orchestra, and how he picked different parts of the orchestra and increased them to crescendos and took them down through that Vivaldi piece. So yes, complete parallels.
Great. We have this question from Mr. Mahesh Limai. He says, in the social sector, driving any change is difficult, maybe more than driving it in the corporate sector. Can you please give a few examples how you overcame the mental blocks?
The mental blocks
while driving a change in the social sector.
Yeah. So I must say, I find the social sector one that really energizes me, because there are lots of people with their hearts in the right place. And I actually learn more than try and drive the change, because there are specialists there who've been working in that field far longer than I have. What I can bring is I question, I understand how to help scale, and I can bring connections and collaboration from outside the organization to drive it. I can't say that I feel huge frustration in terms of a mental block. My frustration, if at all, is the speed of change, but it isn't a mental block. It is more people, maybe it's a more humane way, there's a lot more consultation, a lot more communication, and it's possibly required. So my frustration is more with the pace of change, but never with the mental block.
Right.
Question of Shivani Bhatnagar, our student, and so on.
Sure, sir. So Shivani asks, employees' well-being has come back to the forefront because of the pandemic. While some organizations focus more on the emotional and mental well-being, the financial well-being is something that also needs to be taken care of. What are your views on this?
You're absolutely right. Absolutely. That there are people who saw cutbacks in salary and were probably very nervous that they might lose their jobs. The good news is growth has come back, and at least in the corporate world, salaries have been restored. People are back to work. There is a whole bunch of people out there, especially your readiwalas, restaurants, the small dhabas who have suffered. And I don't know how they come back. And we have to give them a helping hand to return. Some manage to reinvent themselves. Some manage to use a digital medium to grow. And those are wonderful success stories. But I fear many have fallen by the wayside.
Sure. Next question from Mr. Gopal PK is, being an ex-corporate veteran, why do you think a lot of corporate CEOs hesitate to speak truth to the power?
Hesitate to?
To speak the truth.
Speak truth to power.
Oh,
This because speaking truth to people who are powerful. This is a very common phrase being used these days as Nigerian.
Yeah, I think people are fearful, and it's sad if we work in an environment where we need to fear this, but fearful of repercussions. And as a result, what happens is that messages get watered down. uh, Corporate CEOs are, in any case, not the most outspoken people, because at the end of the day, you're mindful not just of yourself, but the ill you can bring your organization, which then impacts a lot of people. Uh, Everything from your shareholders to your employees. So you always have to work as a responsible citizen. And I'm a firm believer that being out there just criticizing in any case doesn't get you anywhere. But if you can be out there giving suggestions for change, so it's not about criticism, it's about saying, here's what we can do better, here's what we can do more of, here's what we might do, is probably the right way to tackle it. And that is, I think, the way of corporate CEOs. And many have really been out there driving the change, demonstrating the change, and then being able to talk about it.
I think this question was probably also having a different connotation, which is also a question of how could CEOs themselves create an environment where people speak truth to them also. That would be another dimension, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, I would like to believe that there's an environment where it's not difficult to do. Because it really is, if two people do it and others see how they are responded to, very quickly an organization swivels to being open. Some are comfortable doing it in a group, others may do it in a more one-to-one sort of basis. But if you can encourage people to speak up, it's the best thing you can do as an organization. It can happen through formal focus groups where people can speak about the organization, if not about the individual, come up with change. And I think focus groups can be quite helpful because you create small groups of people who can talk. There are so many ways that this, the best ideas, you create forums where the best ideas get awarded. You can create these forums within an organization which enable this. There's a lot that can go wrong in companies and organizations too, and it does all the time. We don't always do what we want to do. I know I've been through a period where we had to cut down our numbers. And it's horrible. It's horrible when you're sitting there having to slice people out of a system. How do you decide who goes, how they go? It's never easy. But I think if one can do this in a way with a spirit of openness, transparency, do it in a humane way, make sure people get a fair deal, help them get their next job. I've had people come back to me to say, thank you for helping me find the right place. I was a square peg in the round in a round hole. So a lot has to do with how you connect back with people, and of course the people who surround you. Because if they speak for you and they're doing it with the wrong language and shutting people up, then you can get nowhere.
Vineet Taneja's interesting question.
Sure, sir.
Ayush.
So the question is, what are some of the innovative practices you have witnessed in organizations that you engage with around agility and resilience?
Yeah. So I think I won't call it innovation as much as the resilience comes from enabling decision making at a local level. It comes from making sure that you have technology that works. It can come from the backup systems you have. So, for example, when you have a whole process of back office operations, and while I was at HSBC, 60% of all the processing around the world happened in India. And the resilience you build is by making sure that if a system goes down in Hyderabad, the system in Calcutta can pick up in a nanosecond. So if you have this already in your system, you can make sure that it helps you. Having said that, there are always situations that happen which you aren't ready for. And I can think of two. One was we had these floods in Bombay, which of course Bombay floods, but in this particular horrible floods that happened, it was in that sort of 2005, 2006 period. The entire branch banking system went down because the telecom towers went down, because the power units that supplied the telecom towers went down because of flooding. And you could not connect with your branches, even if you have the best system in the world. And suddenly your branch managers have to make their own decisions. They're sitting there very young. I mean, some of them were like, 20, 30, 31, 32 years old, very driven. And they have their entire team's lives in their hands. Should they wade out in the water? Should they wait in the branch in pitch darkness? They're sitting on tables, not being able to look out, and be having to decide, and no one can tell them what to do. Should they go or should they stay? And the water's rising, right? So I was so struck by, when you leave people with the right training and you have the right type of people, how they come together to make the right decisions. And if there is a decision that was wrong, you can't take them to task for it, because they're in any case agonizing over it, but you can help them understand what they might have done differently. So I think the resilience comes from having the right people as well. And there's a very famous Harvard Business School case on the Indian Hotels Group, which is just about this. What was it that made every young team member make the right decisions for their customers and for themselves, and in the spirit of service? Well, how did they come back, even though into running those telecommunication machines and phones when they were requested to, even though they knew that the hotel was under siege? What is it that drives it? And I think having the right people will always give resilience to an organization. So I would say instill training, empowerment, ability to take decisions in a crisis, move the decision-making down as much as you can. This is what gives us the resilience and agility to rise back up.
My friend Rami Mukhija, the former board member of Larsen and Toubro, is asking a question on succession planning. But Rami, we'll have to wait for you to ask, because we are running out of time. And Khurshid Khurodi has offered to teach you piano if you like to become
beyond redemption now.
But Ayush, would you like to just share your response to what you just heard, and then I'll sum up what we have learned this evening? Yeah, Ayush.
Absolutely, sir. And to begin with, once again, each and everything that ma'am you mentioned, I think it inspires a lot of people right now, and in times to come. So thank you for everything that you have done. If I have to pick, and some things from this particular call that would stay very long with me personally, would be, I think there are three things if I can recall right now. I think the first one would be how at a very early age, you acknowledge the fact that though you were, having the best education, you were doing really well where you were, but still, your mother was into a religious practice, and because you did not understand it completely, you acknowledge the fact that you do not know it all, which in itself is a very simple but very difficult thing to do. Second thing that struck me was, when Anil sir asked a question as to what is something that makes you really proud of yourself, there would have been so many things that you've achieved, right? From awards to the, many prestigious positions that you've held, but you chose to answer by saying that, I took a decision of making a 5-day work week, which impacted so many people. So I think that in itself talks a lot about the kind of leadership that you, portrayed, which, is more about the people that work with you. So that's the second thing. And third thing would be how you explained, right, that you had a lot of challenges while you wanted to move to a different country, to a different demography, and many different challenges, but you decided to actually take that into your stride and all, cross each of these obstacles, and utilizing them to the best of your capability. So I think these are some of the things that would really stay for a very long time with me. And thank you so much for this opportunity to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
Naina, here are the things that I will remain with me for a long time. A
I mean,
6-year-old,
you scare me. You scare me.
the 6-year-old Naina going with her father, sitting in that chair, the swiveling chair, getting exposure to his life and something happening inside you. On one hand, you love your father, you admire him, but you also observe. You observe him at golf, you observe them in the office, and something is born inside you. And then when your father tells you in a loving way, but also in a very clear way, that if you want to go overseas and go beyond the barriers that the uncle, the aunts, and the family are putting in front of you, then you have to go into the best. And you take that as a challenge. And you say, I am very focused and I actually do it. So, a lot of times people have talent, but they are not so focused. They don't put in so much of effort. And the fact that you put that effort to get the best is something quite remarkable. Then you mentioned that, the people of all kinds were coming to your family, and cosmopolitan word, you used that, and you were paying attention to different people. You were listening to people who are not like yourself. And that is such a gift to get at a young age and to imbibe that. And then you said to yourself that, not only are you then coming back to this country and you're going to contribute in your own way in the corporate sector, but there are 3 things you talked about in your leadership style. One, you said, I'm going to get the gender diversity aspect to be raised, but I will get the men in my office to work as teams. This is not about women being different from men. This is the 2 of them working together to see the actual power. I was also very struck by the wisdom you are sourcing from the COVID. You talked about not only the usual things people are talking about, you are mentioning 3 words. You are talking about creativity, you are talking about resilience, and you are talking about agility. And all of them, you are in a way are also a part of who you are, Naina, because you have the curiosity. And because you were curious about music, you were curious about other cultures, you were curious about bringing people who are different together. That aspect has enabled you to intuitively learn. And you are a lifelong learner. And when you got into this new area, which was new to you, that, okay, climate change is something that was given as an opportunity, but you decided to understand it. You went all over the world to learn. And then you practiced it. You didn't just intellectually understand it. You said, I want to work in this field. I'm going to go into the field. I'm going to interact with people. I'm going to learn from them. And unlike many corporate people who tend to sometimes say, these NGOs are not very productive, and, we from the corporate world should come and now improve them. You are being very true in saying that, there are many things we can learn from the social sector. And yes, the speed aspect is different, but the way they genuinely care for the cause and the way they become the followers of that cause, that reminded me of my spiritual teacher, Swami Chinmayananda, saying You know, when you are inspired by a purpose and you become the first servant and follower of that person, then leadership just happens to you, you know. So, which is what we saw in the Taj. You know, I was working with the Taj and I was there with the President Hotel, the leadership team. I called our friend Anjali Raina at that time into that crisis on 26th of 11 and 27th 11. So that's how that case study happened. And there again, we discovered the same thing that you talked about. It's the cause that makes a leader. You know, when you are in this a servant of the cause, great things happen to you. So thanks a lot, Naina, for coming this evening. It's been such a joy to have you. And I wish we could have talked also about my good friend Rashid Kidwai, your
My,
other
secret,
half,
my
and,
secret sauce.
and Baba, and you know what a delightful person he is. But obviously that will have to be on another occasion. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil, and thank you for making everything sound much more important and coherent than I was. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Have
for
a
your time,
restful
ma'am.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye, Ayush. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.